At the midway point of the season, basically. So let's recap the headlines. We'll get the best win, worst loss, and some numbers that you need to know. The headlines so far are 3 games for me. Kansas City beating Miami in Germany 21-14. Miami down 21-0. Let's start at least there because there's another one of those games. Miami has a chance to tie this thing in the last possession. That ends with a fumble. The first half, their possessions went punt, 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 fumble, touchdown, punt. They had 7 punts on the day where they had, one good drive? If you go back to the Philly game, which is what I started thinking about as I was watching this play out, they had only 3 punts in that game, but 1 touchdown drive on offense was surrounded by a bunch of other bad possessions. So it felt like one good drive against Kansas City, 1 good drive against Philly. The other 10 points were a field goal drive after a fumble of 1 yard. That was the drive total, and then the pick 6. So this is a pattern. Miami's lost 9 straight to teams that at the time had a winning record, and their 5 wins this year against teams that are 11-27. Tua's 3 losses, sub 50 QBR. This offense, when it is rattled, is a shell of itself. I thought that Ben Solak had a really good tweet where he talked about the timing and how finely tuned this thing was, and it's this luxury sports car, but then like one grain of sand throws the whole thing off. Well, then figure out how to not have the grain of sand completely derail who you are as a football team. Because the weird thing with Miami that's happening now is like people are taking it personal. It feels like the NFL public is just pissed off at them, whether that's any of us buying into this high-powered offense, wondering if at one point they were the best team in the NFL, wondering if Tua would be the MVP. Like Mike McDaniel's gone from, hey, everybody likes this guy. He says cool things, and he's so down to earth, and he's himself through and through, to who's this dork think he is? You know, like there was stuff out there on social media that just going at him. Like, look how he's dressed. It's like, wait, I thought we all liked this stuff when they scored 70 against Denver. Frauds was the #1 trending topic on Twitter during that game. Granted, it was a little early for a Sunday. There's not a lot of news flying around, but it was frauds, and it was all about the Dolphins. We know that Tua against pressure is a different cat. The numbers show it. It's alarming how different he is against pressure. And he's also not running the football this year, which I think is a plus in a way if you can put up offensive numbers. But part of it, obviously, is to keep him healthy after the big scares last year. But he's averaging 1.4 yards per carry. He's got 8 fumbles. So it's starting to feel a little bit like the Dolphins, like an early 80s Nuggets basketball team where Denver back then would score all of these points, and then you never took them seriously ever in the playoffs, although there was a Western Conference Finals appearance in there. But look, Miami, they've got Vegas, the Jets, the Commanders, the Titans, and Jets. So they could very well be, maybe say 10-4, throw 1 loss in there before they finish with Dallas, at Baltimore, and the Bills. But no one's going to care if they're 10-4, if they're 11-3. Nobody's going to care about that unless they beat Dallas, beat a Baltimore with that defense. Who knows what the Bills are going to look like towards the end of the year? Maybe that game will mean something for the division. Maybe Miami will already have it wrapped up with the way Buffalo has looked. But it's getting really weird. And it's almost like people resent it a little bit. But then Tyreek Hill, he's like, I have my touchdown celebration ready. He called it the new rivalry in the NFL. You're like, this game? This is the new rivalry in the NFL? Like, there was another point that Cerruti brought up, too. He's like, this whole idea that the Chiefs is somehow, like, it's still up for debate whether or not they lost the Tyreek Hill transaction. It's like, dude, they already won a Super Bowl. Like, awesome catches and all the yards. But it was very telling. And I don't think it's a Miami thing. I think it's that all of us are like, hey, we thought you guys were awesome. And now you got destroyed by Buffalo, completely one-sided against Philly. And I know the score tells me that this was a game at the end of it, but it didn't feel like it while we were watching it. Kansas City on the other side, let's look at the offensive numbers between 23 and 22, because that's the sneaky part of this with their record of the #1 seed in the AFC, where you're like, yeah, but something's different. Well, one number is significantly different. If you look at total yards, they're down 43 yards per game off of where they were last year when they were #1 in the league, but they're still 7th this year. Passing yards, they're down about 30 yards per game, #1 in the league last year, #3 this year. So it's not like it's bad. Rushing yards, they never really run the football. The Mahomes scrambles seem to be a get-out-of-jail-free card for them more and more this year on some of those drives, but it's been working. But rushing yards, they were 20th last year, 20th this year. Points per game, They were first last year, 12th this year. They're down almost a touchdown per game scoring. Again, the defense got them 7 yesterday as well. The third down conversion rate, they are 5th best in the NFL of converting third downs. They're 2nd best last season, so that's not it. It's the red zone touchdown scoring. They were the 2nd best team in the NFL, scoring touchdowns on 71% of the red zone possessions last year. This year, it's 15th. That's why the scoring's down. That's why the offense feels different, despite some of the other numbers still being at the higher end of the NFL rankings. Let's jump to the next game. I'm going to go with Philly beating Dallas because it was probably one of my favorite games of the regular season. It was certainly my favorite game yesterday. It felt like two teams in the NFC. You want to talk about the rivalry game, and I know Dallas has their own issues, and it's hard to kind of remove how blasted they got against San Francisco, and maybe there's a little bit of the Miami to Dallas of like, okay, but are you actually going to beat anybody good? I didn't leave this game going, well, Dallas lost again. They're frauds. I left it going, we'll see what happens in the rematch, and I still think Dallas, despite our concerns about who Dak is or Dak isn't, because his overall numbers are really good, but there's an alarming stat they shared during the broadcast. I don't know. It was just, I felt like it was such a competitive game, and there was still a moment there for Dallas to find a way to potentially win it, as hard as that last possession got because of their own mistakes, which we'll get to here in a second. But I don't know. I left it going. I think Dallas is still part of this conversation in a depleted NFC. I'm not saying they're better than Detroit. I'm not saying they're better than San Francisco, but they were competitive in a spot where, again, the spread was minimal here. It was only Philly -3, and it's a division game, so you expect all those things. But you can't just write them off and be like, I hate Dallas because they lost what was supposed to be a marquee matchup for them. So Philly's got the best record in the NFC. They're 8-1. That's the best record. Shout out Mike Sando here on this number. Philly at 8-1 is the best record through 9 games for a Super Bowl loser since the Titans went 8-1 in 2000. Hurts is obviously still banged up. Dak's numbers did look great if you look at just the box score, 29 of 44, 70 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks, but they were 6 of 15 on third down. They also had a number here that's really scary for Dak, and I imagine it's bumped up a bit with the late touchdown yesterday. But when you look at QB rating, which isn't always my favorite stat, but this again was alarming, Hurts is ranked number 1 in the NFL going into this game in QB rating when his team is trailing, where Dak is ranked last. And I wonder what that is today because you got to add in what they did yesterday. I was looking at the last 5 possessions for Dallas because as they're fighting this thing out, trying to find a way to get back and get the win, there's just too many times they get way behind the sticks. Last 5 possessions, they had a 3rd and 15. That was a punt. On the next one, they had a turnover on downs, which, again, was the right call. I know it was called a touchdown at the line of scrimmage. I know it was frustrating. You could say the defender got there a little bit early, but on slow motion, it looks like he gets there early. I never thought live. It's like, oh, that's interference. And unfortunately, the route wasn't deep enough for him to be able to cross the goal line with the football. So they're down on downs there. The 3rd possession that I was tracking here, they ended up getting the touchdown, but they got behind the sticks again. There was a 2nd and 13, and then obviously Dak stepping out of bounds before the 2-point conversion changed everything as far as strategy on that last possession. The second to last possession here, number 4, they went to 2nd and 17, 3rd and then 21, and then on downs. And then this is the possession that you're just going to be haunted by if you're a Cowboys fan. They ended up getting it to 1st and goal at the Philly 6. It might have been 1st and 5 at the Philly 6 there after the penalty. Speaking of penalties, Dallas's next play is after being at the 6-yard line, first out, real chance at this, a false start, a sack that made it 2nd and 21, a delay of game, then it was 3rd and 26, and CeeDee Lamb has the catch that comes up short of the end zone. Philly is finishing these games with a ferocity that is, I don't want to say unmatched, because I still feel like there's moments with Pittsburgh and TJ Watt and Highsmith and Golden and that front where they just look like hungry dogs late in a game. So maybe Philly's the standard, but Pittsburgh shouldn't be overlooked, at least in that conversation. But that's how Philly closed this one out yesterday. And I love what I see from Jalen Hurts in different game spots because, granted, A.J. Brown's almost like borderline MVP conversation stuff. Devontae's always going to be able to make plays for you. They lose the tight end to the forearm situation there, Goddard. So we'll see what happens there with him once more news comes out. But Hurts, despite being banged up and not really looking like a threat to run whatsoever, and I do wonder with this knee injury that he has, and he got smashed on that knee again, and it looked like it was going to be a bigger issue, but he came back into the game. If the push in the short yardage situations, if that's taking any kind of toll, or maybe it has nothing to do with it. It's just a question I'm asking, something I was thinking about as I was watching the game. But specific to Hurts, like when they're up and you think he might dial it back, like he'll take a shot. And granted, those receivers, he gets them one-on-one, they're getting the ball. He threw one to A.J. Brown that was incomplete. There was 3 defensive backs around A.J. Brown, and he still made that throw. So if he gets picked, I'm probably sitting here criticizing, being like, why are you throwing into triple coverage? But what I like about him is that he mixes the predictable, easy stuff with the not predictable game situation throws where he's still going to give guys a chance. And I think receivers, especially 2 dudes as talented as them, love that he takes those chances. Hurts, by the way, now 63 rushing yards in his last 3 games combined, which I think has as much to do with the knee thing as them just trying to figure out. I just don't. It's not like it's going to be gone, but there is always a correction with the dual threat guys where they just start running it less and less. It would feel a little early for Hurts to be at that position. It's primarily the knee thing, but something else I'm noticing there. It's just not much of a threat. As far as I think 2 of the games were nothing, and one of the games was like 40 rushing yards. Keep you honest. Cincinnati's win against Buffalo. Buffalo finding another way to be in the game when it didn't feel like they had a chance to be in it. Cincinnati's now scored on its first 2 possessions in 4 straight games. It's kind of back-to-back, we're the better team wins for Cincinnati against San Francisco and Buffalo. That it was so one-sided against San Francisco late was surprising. This one, not as much with the way Buffalo's going right now. If you're looking at Cincinnati's defense, they're allowing 17 points per game in their last 4 wins, 4 straight. The playoffs this morning, at least the standings, Cincinnati's a 7 seed. The Bills are now a 9 seed. The Allen stuff is alarming. The throw where he ends up getting picked in this game, it was a 2nd and 10 from the Buffalo 12, and they were only down 14-7, and it was a bad pick. And the way I look at interceptions, they're all different for like blame, risk. What was the point of that? Oh, that wasn't really his fault. Like, I wish we could find a way to just classify like picks in 5 different categories, but that'd be ridiculous and it'd be too objective. But this isn't objective. Like that throw at 2nd and 10, down 14-7, that early in the game, that early in the possession, you just didn't really need it. And he had a later throw that I thought could have been picked off, where you're so enamored with his arm strength that you're like, that's terrific. But look, this is a bigger issue than Allen. I mean, Allen today, do you realize is still the number 1 QB rating in the NFL? And QB rating can lie at times. There's times the QB rating where I'm like, okay, this is not true. This is a lie here. If you look at, I think QB rating, the old one, the QB rating, I think Russell Wilson's 5th, and in QBR, he's like 20th. So Allen still has some really good stats there, except the turnover stuff, the cumulative stuff since 2018. Nobody has more turnovers. But Buffalo's down, I think, 5 projected starters now because of injury just on defense alone. And the other tight end got hit again. And if you look at the schedule for Buffalo, they've got Denver and the Jets, but then they've got this stretch where they're at Philly, at Kansas City, Dallas, and then at the Chargers, New England, wrapped up with that last game that we talked about, Miami, to finish this. So this is a Buffalo team, too, that cannot run the football. If you want to go through those numbers, because I love Tirico's line when Buffalo was trying to get back in the game, which they did, and they still, oddly enough, had a chance to even win it. Tirico had a great line where it was like, all right, they're just going to come out and throw. And Collins was like, yeah, I think this is what it is tonight. And Tirico goes, we'll worry about the rushing game tomorrow. But when is tomorrow happening? Because it seems to be a pattern here for quite a while. If you take away Allen's rushing yards in the last few games, they ran for 24 yards against Cincinnati, ran for 74 yards against Tampa, 64 yards against the Pats. They went for 127 against the Giants. They had only 15 rushing yards against Jacksonville in that loss against London. And Allen also has the highest interception percentage on throws since his rookie year. But we covered the QBR stuff, which is still kind of crazy that he's ranked up that high based on the perception of him. But it's going to be more about him limiting that mistake every now and then figuring out what kind of defense you have left for a Buffalo team, again, a 9 seed this morning in the AFC. The best win will stay in the AFC. Ravens beat Seattle 37-3. They ran it for 298 yards, over 7 yards per carry. Lamar now has the lowest interception percentage of his career, which is almost half of his overall career number. Because at one point 2 years ago, he was over 3% interception rate on throws. Last year, it was 2.1. This year, it's 1.2. He's getting better and better now in this offense. And the defense is really the story for Baltimore on top of everything else. They've allowed 9 touchdowns total through 9 games, which is the same as the vaunted 2000 team, which I don't like really doing. Worst loss, I don't know that there is one that just absolutely jumps out. I mean, is it Atlanta blowing that one? Is it, I mean, you're going to get upset about Carolina and the Colts. I guess score-wise, you could say Giants, you could say Seattle, but I feel like we covered on the best win thing. You could say Giants because the Raiders smashed him, but Daniel Jones is now out with the ACL. So losing him and continuing to lose games puts them maybe in that 4-team race for the number 1 pick. If we go NFL standings and you go league-wide right now, the teams are Arizona, Carolina, who's not in charge of their pick. So it's Chicago, the Pats, and the Giants, all 2-7 or worse. So maybe what looks like a terrible loss on the scoreboard is a win for the Giants when you start getting into that race for the number 1 pick. Numbers you should know. All right. The Raiders, 24 points in the first half, more than any game this season that they had. The offense, not the team, but the offense never scored more than 20 points on offense this season. Shout out to Antonio Pierce, one of the realest dudes ever. I love him getting a chance here being a head coach. He has been coaching the last few years, college and the pros. He's one of my favorite guys going back to ESPN. We'd had him on the show. We love the dude. So I will be rooting for him. This is the most I've ever rooted for the Raiders in my entire life. The best number maybe from the entire week is the story of C.J. Stroud. We will spend a lot more time with him on McShay at the top. Stroud, 470 yards, rookie record, 5 touchdowns, ties it, I believe. He had, according to Next Gen Stats, look at this, on air throws, 20 or more yards, okay? You don't get a lot of those throws, believe it or not, in the NFL. He was 6 of 8 for 199 yards, 3 touchdowns, and then they have a Next Gen game score that they give out. And, look, you see it in some of the analytics stuff with basketball and football all the time. But his game score, according to Next Gen, was 96, which is the highest single score for any quarterback in any game this season. And we'll end it on a number I normally hate. Win probability. What do they have for the Texans on the last drive, which was absurd, the game-winning touchdown drive by Stroud and the throws. They gave him 8.59% chance of even winning that game.